As chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This is a full committee work session. Executive sessions on pending legislation may be held. Please note there is no physical location for the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting by the Zoom platform or by all necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the general website. The notice for this meeting complies with House Rules of RSA 91-A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting should call 271-3600 or email hcs@leg.state.nh.us. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. I want to introduce the staff that are meeting assisting us, Jennifer Floor, and the committee who is the committee researcher. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call of attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room reviewing this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. Bernstein, you can call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think we'll all be impressed when you have that script memorized. Representative Abrami.
Here, home alone, Stratum.
Representative Griffin.
Yes. Here
Good
in my
morning.
home alone.
Very good. Representative O'Leary.
As soon as I find the unmute button, I'll say that I'm here in my office alone.
Thank you. Representative Ober.
Here in Hudson with 6 cats.
Doucette.
Here in my home office, Salem alone.
Burstein is here in Nottingham in his home office alone. Elliott.
Here, and my wife is in the kitchen.
Janigian.
Here in my home office in Salem, New Hampshire. My wife and daughter are somewhere in the house.
Nunes.
Good morning, Representative. Thank you. I'm home alone in Pelham.
Baxter.
He's running a couple of minutes late.
Okay. Representative Spilsbury.
Here alone in Charlestown at home.
Tudor.
Here alone in Northwood.
Almy.
You'll be on in just a moment.
Okay, thank you. Ames.
Yeah, here alone in Jeffrey in my home office.
Southworth.
Here, home alone in Dover.
Malloy.
Here in Greenland, and my wife is in the house.
Schamberg.
I'm in my truck coming back from Concord to Wilmot, alone.
Tucker.
I'm alone in Randolph.
Gomarlo.
Home alone in Swansea.
Lothman.
Home alone in Hampton.
Good morning, Tom. Representative Gorg.
Good morning. I am alone. I'm here and I'm alone.
Hacken Phillips.
Morning. I'm present from my office in Concord alone.
Murphy.
Good morning. I'm here alone in my office in Hanover.
Representative Major.
Here I'm in my office in Plasto and my wife is in the house.
Representative Baxter.
Thank you, Representative. I'm here and alone.
And Representative Almy.
Thank you. Sorry that I lost my link. I'm here alone in my house in Lebanon.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to report 100% attendance. All 24 of us are here.
That is super. Okay, today is a work session on the House bills that we previously heard on the 28th of January and the 4th of February. I communicated, Dems have had their caucus, and Republicans have had their caucus. We reviewed the bills and we've identified those that both caucuses are in agreement with. Representative Elmy and myself have been meeting after the caucus meeting to compare notes. And what I'd like to be able to do is concentrate on those bills that we are in agreement on first and get those discussed and exec, and then we can continue the rest of the day on those that we need more work or are very controversial. Does anybody have a problem with that? I will identify the bills that we would like to do today. House Bill 134, House Bill 181, House Bill 324, House Bill 354, and House Bill 528. If anybody feels that these should not be discussed in exec today, let me know. I don't see any hands being raised, so we'll go to the first one. House Bill 134. House Bill 134, repealing certain inactive dedicated funds. Does anybody have any additional questions or comments on that?
That was a great job done by the Joint Committee on identifying those funds that needed to be eliminated.
All right, then, anybody wish to discuss any further? If not, do I hear a motion on House Bill 134?
Yes, Representative Burstein will move that this should OTP, HB 134.
Representative Bernstein moves O2P on 134. Do I hear a second?
I would like to second it.
Representative Elmy seconds the motion. Any further then we are now in executive session. I should have mentioned that first. Any further discussion before we take a vote? Then I'll ask the clerk to call the vote. If you're in favor of opt to pass on 134, you vote yes. If not, you vote no. Representative Bernstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's begin the roll call vote on HB 134. The motion is ought to pass. Representative Abrami.
Yes.
Griffin. Star 6.
She can't vote because she doesn't have a camera.
Here.
Right. Okay.
She knows that, she's aware of that.
Okay, Representative Olery.
Yes.
Ober.
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Doucette.
Yes.
Elliott. You're muted, Bob.
You gotta unmute yourself, Bob. Representative Elliott, unmute. Okay.
Did you hear me?
No.
Yes.
Thank you. Representative Janigian,
Yes.
Nunez,
Yes.
Baxter,
Yes.
Spilsbury,
Yes.
Tudor,
Yes.
Almy,
Yes.
Ames,
Yes.
Southworth,
Yes.
Malloy,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Tucker,
yes,
Gomarlo,
Yes,
Loftman.
Yes.
Schaumburg, is he on video?
Oh, let's back up.
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, okay.
And Representative Loftman, I'm not seeing you. There you
I'm
go.
here.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Representative Gorg,
Yes.
Haken Phillips,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
and Representative Major.
Yes,
The vote is 23-0 with one no vote, with one not voting.
does anybody have objections to having this on the consent calendar? Being no objection, then the motion about to pass passes and it will appear on the consent calendar.
Representative Major, may I say something?
Yes,
It's easy if you have a laptop or a desktop to just hit the space bar and say yes or no. And then you don't have to go through the mouse maneuvering. Just a hint.
But I've discovered you have to hit it in the middle.
oh,
Okay, thank you.
I can't imagine Susan hitting anything.
all right. The next one is House Bill 181. House Bill 181, relative to the local option for operation of sports retail locations. Any discussion on House Bill 181? Seeing no
Mr.
discussion.
Chairman,
Yes,
I'd just like to say something brief about it. The prime sponsor has not communicated with us at all, and it looks very much like the bill it was meant to be brought in last year, and that it's really not necessary at this point.
so do I hear a motion to ITL from somebody in your caucus? And we'll back it up by somebody in our caucus.
I don't know if anybody, I'll do it.
Okay, Representative Almy makes the motion of ITL on House Bill 181, and Representative Yurley
I'll second.
will second it. Going to executive session. Oops, I screwed up again, but that's all right. We are now in executive session on House Bill 181. Representative Almy made the motion of ITL, seconded by Representative Yurley. Any further discussion on House Bill 181? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion is ITL on HB 181. Let's begin the roll call vote with Representative Abrami.
Yes.
Representative Griffin will not be voting. Representative Ullery.
Yes.
Ober.
Wait, he's got to show his face.
Oh, show you.
Yes.
Thank you. Ober.
Yes.
The clerk Burstein votes yes. Doucette.
Yes.
Elliott.
Yes.
Janigian.
Yes.
Nunez.
Yes.
Show his face. He was off. Sorry. Yep, there he is.
Okay. Baxter.
Yes.
Spilsbury.
Yes.
Tudor. Representative Tudor.
Representative Suter, you need to unmute yourself.
Paul, you're muted right now.
You stopped your
And not
video.
visible.
Put your video on and unmute. There you go.
I'm sorry, my internet's flipping out here, but yes.
Okay, thank you. Representative Olney,
Yes.
Representative Ames,
Yes.
Southworth,
Yes.
Malloy,
Yes.
Schaumburg,
Yes.
Tucker,
Yes.
Gomarlo,
Yes.
Loftman,
Yes.
Gorg,
Yes.
Hacken Phillips,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Major.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the vote is 23-0 with one member not voting.
Okay. With the vote 23-0, the motion passes. Without objection, it will go on consent calendar. Any objection? Okay, then it will appear on the consent calendar.
Representative Major,
Yes.
this is Representative Ames.
Yes, Representative Ames.
I just have a question and a suggestion with regard to Representative Griffin, who's apparently unable to use video, and whether it might be by consensus of the committee allowed for her to vote. We all recognize her voice, so we have recognition there, and as an exception to the rule that you're properly enforcing in all other respects.
I had that discussion with leadership, and I don't buy it. You've got to be able to see the person. I agree with you, Representative Ames. And I tried to make that happen.
Well, thank you for that, and I regret that we're in this situation. It's most unfortunate.
It certainly is.
I tried as well. Representative Major couldn't make the chairs meeting on Monday. I brought that up as well to the speaker, and he took it under consideration, but I think, as Representative Major said, he didn't want to start making exceptions. And I used the same argument you did. We all recognize her, and I suggested that if all the members of the committee agreed, it was something that we should allow, but didn't go anywhere. I agree with you too, Dick.
Thank you.
Mary, you're as important to us as anybody else is. So that's what the rule is right now. Okay. The next bill will be House Bill 324. House Bill 324, relative to the administration of certain state taxes by the Department of Revenue Administration. And this is a housekeeping bill requested by the DRA. Okay. Any questions or comments?
Making the motion. So this is a reminder. It does four things: clarifies electronic filing of meals, rooms taxes, excludes interest for the 30-day period after notice of assessment of state taxes for amounts paid within 30-day period, removes the consideration of weighted apportionment factors under the business profits tax from exclusion in the tax exemption report. And fourth thing it does is it provides for conformity in business tax filing dates on nonprofit corporations in this state with the United States Internal Revenue Code filing dates. And we really didn't have much discussion about this or when we heard the bill presented by DRA. So I think we're ready to go.
So Representative, we're going to executive session. Representative Abrami, you making the motion?
Yeah, I'm making the motion, OTP.
Representative Southworth, second.
I really can't hear Representative Abrami very well when he's,
Okay. I'm trying. Any better?
Pat, I could hear you fine.
Okay, the motion has been made by Representative Abrami, about to pass, seconded by Representative Southworth. Any discussion? And then I'm going to ask the clerk to call the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's begin the roll call vote with Representative Abrami.
Yes.
Mary Griffin will not be voting. Jordan Olery. Turn on your video and unmute yourself.
Jordan.
There you
Yes.
go. Thank you. Representative Ober.
Yes.
The clerk Burstein votes yes. Doucette.
Yes.
Elliott.
Yes.
Janigian.
Yes.
Nunez.
Yes.
Baxter.
Yes.
Spilsbury.
Yes.
Tudor.
Yes.
Almy.
You're muted, Susan.
I know the space bar didn't work for a minute. Yes.
Thank you. For the space bar to work, the Zoom window has to be your active window. If you're working in another window, the space bar will not work.
I was raising the volume.
Representative Ames.
Yes.
Southworth.
Yes.
Malloy.
Yes.
Schomburg.
Representative Schamberg votes yes.
Thank you. Representative Tucker.
Yes.
Gomarlo.
Yes.
Laufman.
Yes.
I see you. Gorg.
Yes.
Hacken Phillips.
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes.
Major.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chair, the motion of ought to pass passes 23-0 with one member not voting.
On House Bill 324, the motion about to pass passes by a vote of 23-0. Without objection, we'll go on the consent calendar. Any objection? I don't see any objection, so it will go on the consent calendar. Next will be House Bill 354. House Bill 354, an act relative to the local option for sports betting. Do I have any discussion?
So
Representative Tucker.
may I suggest that when the clerk begins to call the roll, everybody unmute themselves at the same time? Just will move things along.
As long as one person doesn't keep saying yes. Okay. All right. House Bill 354. Any discussion on that? If not, Representative Elliott, do you have a motion? Representative Elliott. On House Bill
354?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. House Bill 354 is about the problem of liability. The present wording says, "We are liable." But that term is not very clear as to who "we" is. The new wording is an attempt to make it perfectly clear that the town or city is the liable entity. So in the case of my hometown, Salem, New Hampshire, the word will be quite definite, and I quote, "Shall the town of Salem, New Hampshire allow the operation of sports book retail locations within the town of Salem, New Hampshire, period, thus making the town liable, not we." Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do I hear a motion?
I so move. Oh, I can't make the motion.
You can. Yes, you can.
Oh, I move. I move.
Moves ought to pass. And do we have somebody from the other caucus that would want to second that?
I'll second.
Who's that?
Murphy.
Representative Murphy. Okay, the motion on House Bill 354 is ought to pass by Representative Elliott, seconded by Representative Murphy. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, I'll ask the clerk to call the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The roll call vote on HB 354. Consider unmuting yourself right now, and let's blow through this and make Representative Tucker proud of our committee. Let's begin the vote with Representative Abrami.
Yes.
Representative Griffin will not be voting. Hold on. Representative Olery.
Yeah.
Ober.
Yes.
The clerk votes yes. Doucette.
Yes.
Elliott.
Yes.
Janigian.
Yes.
Nunez.
Yes.
Baxter.
Yes.
Pillsbury.
Yes.
Tudor.
Yes.
Almy.
Yes.
Ames.
Yes.
Southworth.
Yes.
Malloy.
Yes.
Schaumburg.
Representative Schamberg votes yes.
Tucker.
Yes.
Gomarlo.
Yes.
Loftman.
Yes.
Gorg.
Yes.
Hacken Phillips.
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes.
Major.
Yes.
Great job, everyone. The vote is 23 to love with one member not voting.
How'd we do, Representative Tucker?
She's smiling. Okay, House Bill, the vote on House Bill 354 of ought to pass passes a vote of 23-0. Without objection, we go on the consent calendar. Is there any objections? I don't see it, so we'll go on the consent calendar. And one more is the House Bill 528.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to ITL HB 528.
Okay, just 1 second. I gotta pull it out.
Sorry about that.
And House Bill 528 is an act relative to electronic filing of state tax returns. And Representative Baxter has made a motion of ITL.
I'd like to second that.
Okay. So you have to wait up for my handwriting here.
It can't be worse than mine, Mr. Chair.
You haven't seen mine.
We do have a doctor present.
Who's the doctor?
Murphy.
Oh, Murphy.
That's kind of a low blow. Sue. I write pretty well.
My parents were doctors.
I was taught by the Jesuits to write well.
Well, they will teach you well too. They use the ruler if it doesn't.
Write well or write good?
Whack, whack.
Jesuits.
All right. On House Bill 528, the motion has been made to ITL by Representative Baxter, seconded by Representative Tucker. Any discussion on this? Any discussion on the motion of ITL? And I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll on ITL.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's begin the roll call vote on HB 528. The motion is ITL. Let's begin with Representative Abrami.
Yes.
We're retaining.
Representative Griffin is not voting. Representative O'Leary.
Yes.
Representative Ober.
Yes.
Burstein votes yes. Doucette.
Yes.
Elliott.
Yes.
Unigian.
Yes.
Nunez.
Yes.
Baxter.
Yes.
Spilsbury.
Yes.
Tudor. We didn't hear you, Representative Tudor.
Yes, I'm still having trouble with internet here. It was yes.
Very good. Thank you. Representative Almy.
Yes.
Ames.
Yes.
Southworth.
Yes.
Malloy.
Yes.
Schomburg.
Representative Schamberg votes yes.
Tucker.
Yes.
Laufman.
Yes. What am I, chopped liver?
Sorry. Gomarlo.
Yes.
Gord.
Yes.
Hacken Phillips.
Yes.
Murphy.
Yes.
Representative Major.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, the vote is 23 to love with one member not voting.
The vote of ITL on House Bill 528 being 23 to 0 passes. Without objection, it will appear on the consent calendar. Any objections? I see no objections, so it will appear on the consent calendar. Okay, that's the last of the easy ones. We can discuss HB 10, which is a truly partisan issue. But we're not going to take a vote on it today. We'll vote on it tomorrow. So we'll pull HB 10 out. HB 10, an act relative to the rates of business profits tax and business enterprise tax. And this reduces the business profits tax from 7.7% to 7.5% over 2 years. And the business enterprise tax goes from 0.06% to 0.05% over 2 years. Discussion. Sure, there will be a lot of it.
Rep. Southworth.
I see is Representative Southworth. Representative Southworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the further cutting of state level business taxes. I think there's still too many unknown factors that can affect the revenue projections. How long will it take to move beyond the many impacts of the COVID pandemic? The timeline for public vaccination changes regularly. Some people are not following safety recommendations. Some people won't get vaccinated. Once New Hampshire does make significant progress against COVID, it's still unclear how the New Hampshire economy will rebound. The business tax picture is further complicated by the upcoming shift to market-based sourcing and the future use of the single sales factors. With all the above questions still unanswered, it seems prudent to maintain the current business tax percentages for the next biennium. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Southworth. Representative Elmy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We really don't have any idea yet what the next 12 months and the next budget is or term is going to bring. The medical community thinks that the variants, that we're going to end up in a race with the variants to get enough people vaccinated so that they will not be mutating and spreading all over the country. They are spreading in other parts of the world at this point. And that has a huge effect on our economy and when we can start to come out of the COVID era. On both market-based sourcing and the single sales factor, our current law on we're going to have to take a wild stab at what they do when we do our revenue estimates. That goes to the budget. The budget is then going to add this, I presume, on and we will have an extremely risky balance between expenditures and revenues when we get there. At the BIA summit this fall, business CEOs revealed that they are told by their accountants only what their total tax burden is, not how much of it is federal taxes, state taxes, municipal property taxes, water district taxes, or whatever. It is also not near the top of their list of priorities. In fact, on average, in 2019, slightly over half of their state and local tax and fee burden was property tax, and less than a quarter of it was our business taxes. The property tax share has been growing over the years as we cut state business taxes and shifted the cost to the towns. Our largest state level revenue source is paid overwhelmingly by multi-state and multinational corporations that regard New Hampshire's taxes as very low on their list of reasons to operate here. There are well over half of the state's businesses that have no tax liability at all for the business taxes, and an unknowable number of them do not even file. So you're aiming this tax decrease at businesses that really aren't paying attention to it. And further reduction of those business taxes is counterproductive both to our economy and to our citizenry. Because of this shift, somebody has to pay for the state government and for the town governments. And we are sending more and more of that burden down to the town governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Elmy. Representative Bromney.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this just brings us back to the House position of a couple of years ago. As you know, that in the last budget, the compromise was triggers, 6%, I think it was 6% either way on general and education fund revenues. If they fell below 6%, then we would revert back an increment from what had already been happened. The reduction would have been, we had to go back a step. And, but the other 6% the other way was we could continue with the tax reductions if revenues exceeded that revenue from education and the general trust fund money, and neither of those triggers were hit. So the continuation of the tax reduction stopped. This bill just moves that forward again. And as far as the pandemic, we won't know until March and April, where we really stand with business taxes. But all indications are that since we have so many large companies that make up the triangle there, and they seem to have weathered so far, it seems like they're weathering the pandemic quite well. I'm a little bit more optimistic about where our business taxes will come in at the end of by the end of this year and going forward. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Abrami. Representative Murphy.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that, you know, speaking from the medical community, COVID, just like the Great Recession, has had obviously devastating consequences. We will have over 500,000 dead in the country, and the economic downturn has been significant. So I know we have been trying to get a hold of authorities, so to speak, that can speak to the impact of COVID going forward. We have not been successful, so I've reached out to infectious disease and epidemiologists that I know well, and their opinion about the near-term future, especially in the first year of our biennium, is that it's not predictable at all. They're very positive about the vaccines and its effectiveness. They're very positive about the fact that 85% of the country is now wearing masks. But we know that the variants and the vaccine effectiveness against these variants is unpredictable and not as good. There was a recent article just yesterday in the Valley News up here in the AP, speaking to the fact that people that have had previous infections are not really certain to be immune going forward, or they may not have the same immunity as a vaccine provides. So in that regard, I would like to draw your attention to an article that came out just 2 days ago from the Fiscal Policy Institute. I think we know Phil Sletton well. We know that he is fairly unbiased, and it's apropos to our discussions today. It's titled, actually, and I can send it to everybody if they want it, Designing a State Budget to Meet the New Hampshire Needs During and After COVID-19. How appropriate is that? And what their research shows is that during and after the Great Recession, Moody's Analytics and the Congressional Budget Office both looked hard at the policies that actually stimulate or do not stimulate economic growth. The research suggested that deploying resources first to low income into public services goes a lot further in stimulating economic activity. So for instance, they gave specific numbers. For every dollar in expenditures that they looked at after the Great Recession, the SNAP program, supplemental nutrition, returned on an investment of 1.75, basically 75% over the dollar invested. Unemployment insurance benefits, $1.60. Public health infrastructure, $1.60. Child tax credits, $1.40. These are all improvements, or these are all measured in economic activity. When they looked at corporate and business income tax reductions, the return on $1 was 0.3, 30 cents on a dollar. That does not seem good. I would just argue that given the uncertainty going forward, especially in the first year of a biennium, where we may have some flexibility, we can debate in the future whether or not, you know, the merits of decreased taxes are appropriate for corporate and businesses. However, I think now in the middle of a pandemic, an uncertain future, and given the research and the experience from the Great Recession, this is just not the time to be cutting corporate or business taxes. And it's supported by research, not in New Hampshire, but by the Congressional Budget Office and Moody's Analytics. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Representative Murphy. And why don't you go ahead and email that to us?
I will email you and Sue so she can just, you guys can send it out on the listservs. How's that sound?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next is Representative Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, we are coming out of the pandemic. You know, a lot of the briefings we're seeing, it appears that we might be turning this corner, but there's still some uncertainty. And I think especially because of that uncertainty is why we should be prioritizing these tax cuts. And really it's a return to the already existing schedule. So there's nothing that dramatic here, but 95% or more, 96% by some estimates of the employers in New Hampshire are small businesses. You know, these mom and pop businesses have been decimated during COVID, and this gradual reduction in the business profit tax and the BET are very important to helping small businesses survive and turn the corner. A lot of small businesses are struggling. They've racked up debt. They're on the brink of closing, and so these tax cuts on the margin can help keep our small businesses alive. And it's done in a very responsible way. It's gradual. And as Pat pointed out, the trigger still exists. So if revenue does drop off, you know, things will revert. But I strongly support these tax cuts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Baxter. The order changed. Representative Ames.
Thank you. A couple of preliminaries. Representative Baxter just said the trigger still exists. So far as I know, it does not. I think it does not.
I agree with that. It doesn't.
It's past history.
Right.
So that needs to be clear. And the second preliminary point is that I just sent to all members early this morning a letter to Andrew Klein responding to a letter that he sent to all of us in which he referred to an article and sent us a link to an article that was published by one of the Federal Reserve branches, and it's a staff working article. And the letter that I sent points out that within that article, there are caveats that essentially make it inapplicable to the situation we have here in New Hampshire. And I also drew attention to another article, a more recent article, that comes to quite a different conclusion. The matter addressed in these articles is entrepreneurial activity, particularly startup activity. And the second article says that there's no evidence one way or the other as to the impact of the kinds of tax changes we're talking about here in the context of House Bill 10. So that's preliminary. And then I just wanted to make a more in-depth statement and point about the assertions, responding to the assertions by supporters of this bill that business tax revenues will go up when rates go down. I find that these assertions are backed only by anecdote and ideology, or sometimes by graphs that display apparent historical correlations between increased revenues and tax rate reductions, particularly pointing to this last decade of experience that we've had here in New Hampshire. I suggest that these assertions are not supported by a fact-based inquiry. There are complex and interacting variables that have to be taken into account. Some of those developments that have increased New Hampshire revenue through this past decade, despite the BBT and BET tax rate cuts, have included, and here I'm going to go into a short list. First, there's been a massive, we all know this, at least those of us who've been with Ways and Means for a while, a massive repatriation in recent years of transnational corporate profits, coupled with an unusual volume of profit-generating corporate mergers and transactions that were triggered by federal tax law considerations, and that have resulted in very large, anomalous, that's DRA's term, or one-time New Hampshire business tax revenues that were estimated by DRA to be about $200 million over several years. And then another influence on another set of revenue enhancing developments that have overwhelmed tax rate cuts have included big changes, large changes in taxable profit producing business activity in New Hampshire. These are activities that are engaged in by very big national and multinational entities, many of which are identified by DRA as so-called water's edge companies, whose tax payments make up the bulk, more than 50% of our total business tax revenues, and whose taxable activity here is, I can assure you, not influenced by marginal changes in our business tax rates. And also through this past decade, and always through any period of time, there have been and will be many other revenue enhancing developments, including changes from year to year in the federal tax law and in our own tax law that substantially modify the amount of deductions and credits taken on their returns by business taxpayers, and those too influence greatly revenues quite independent of tax rates. We all know that future revenues will always be affected by the coming and going of peaks and troughs in the business cycle, and by other totally unpredictable developments locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. This unpredictable reality is illustrated most recently by our ongoing struggle with the revenue impact of COVID-19 and by the infusion of very large federal grants. DRA's fiscal note for HB 10 projects that its proposed business tax cuts could result in a long-term $53.7 million per year revenue loss. That's a static analysis and puts aside all the variables that I've just talked about. It's just a mathematical calculation. I believe that is the best estimate of impact that we have for this bill. And I also believe that we cannot accept the level of revenue loss that enactment of HB 10 will expose us to. This bill is fiscally irresponsible. I hope it will be defeated. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ames. Representative Malloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Alme and others have already talked about what businesses pay in terms of taxes and may not have a itemized idea of their property taxes, business profits taxes, but we're pretty sure they pay more in property taxes in this state than they do business taxes. And they've talked about that in surveys among BIA members and others. They continually talk about the property taxes as being much more onerous and difficult to deal with than just about anything else. And with this, and these property taxes go up every year. And a lot of that is due to the withdrawal or reduction of state aid for direct municipal and county subsidies and for provision of services such as police training, elder and indigent assistance in public health, and of fixed public school system costs. I was a selectman in a town right after the Great Recession, or right after it, and we saw firsthand what a loss of state revenue did, to the towns, and we had to scramble to make new budgets for this town. and had to raise the property taxes. It was because we were forced to take up expenses that the state had normally carried, most notably the support of retirement for public officials, police, fire, and all that. Residents just couldn't understand why, if there were tax cuts and budget cut, why the state was spending less money, why their property taxes went up. And selectmen in towns all across the state were caught in a bind to try to explain that. And it was tough. And I just, in my opinion, having been in the trenches like that, I think we could be causing our towns to look at this again, force increases in property taxes because of the word downshifting. And I think that creates a burden on property taxpayers, and that's clearly my position on this because I've experienced it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Malloy. Representative Yurley.
Thank you. Excuse the printer in the background. I'm just looking up a few things. The discussion thus far has been about a reduction in revenue, and yet when these tax cuts, business tax cuts were instituted, there was a substantial increase in revenue. Across the nation, there has been an increase in revenue when tax cuts have been implemented. A recent CNBC article published, February 8th of 2021, indicates that there is a flow of jobs and cash and business opportunity from the high tax Northeast to the low tax South. So how do we stem that flow? We keep talking about stemming the flow of the loss of students from the area that get a good education at UNH or at Dartmouth and then leave. We talk about stemming the flow of population to the South. Well, there's one way to do that. Let's make it more economically advantageous for people to stay in the Northeast. Just today, West Virginia has introduced legislation to lower their business taxes. And I say West Virginia because, like New Hampshire, they're mountainous. Like New Hampshire, they have a population that has suffered for too long under a too heavy a tax burden. There was also an argument that this shifts taxes down to the towns. Well, who's responsible for what a town spends? The town is responsible. The citizens are responsible. If they want to build a brand spanking new high school every 3 years, that's up to the town. It's not up to the state to cover their other expenses so they can afford that. They need to do that. They need to address their own expenses. Tax cuts have a multiplier effect upon the economy. They always have and they always will be. Whether it's the Kennedy-Johnson tax reductions or the Reagan tax reductions or the Bush-Trump income tax cuts, they have a multiplier effect. They stimulate the economy. They make sure that the working man has money in his pocket because he has a job and he's getting paid. So I'll have to thank that for that interruption, sorry. But the tax cuts work. They always have worked. They always will work. So I'm in favor of passing this and would make that motion right now if allowed.
You all through, Representative Yurley?
I'm all done, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Yurley. Representative Schoenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern about House Bill 10's purpose of tax rate reductions for BPT and BET is its effect upon the state's budget placed in the recovery to meet the needs of granted staters. I turned my research for impact information on what New Hampshire tax policies do concerning public health risks and the effect upon economic recovery if tax rate reductions are implemented. The source, I believe, that uses a moderate factual approach to New Hampshire's state tax policies is the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute. As Representative Murphy mentioned, the most recent issue brief dated February 8th, 2021 by the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute is titled Designing a State's Budget to Meet New Hampshire's Needs During and After the COVID-19 Crisis. The takeaway from this report, when applied to House Bill 10, is, will the proposal of permanent tax reductions of the BPT and the BET in House Bill 10 help provide for the alleviating of continued public health risks and still support New Hampshire's economic recovery? In reviewing the policy brief, a few summary points were stressed. New Hampshire residents still face substantial challenges to affording basic expenses to particular provisions of healthcare and social services. Federal support has provided critical relief, but has not alleviated hardship in a complete or sustained manner. 1 in 4 Granite Staters report it was somewhat or very difficult to pay usual household expenses, of which healthcare is one. Federal and state programs designed to provide health coverage to people with low incomes or limited assets has increased by nearly 20% in New Hampshire between the end of February 2020 to the end of January 2021, meaning 214,000 New Hampshire residents are now enrolled in Medicaid. The second summary point, during this ongoing COVID pandemic, Granite Staters who face or facing severe health impacts, children who had more challenges to being able to successfully participate in remote schooling, and families who became less housing and food secure are likely to be in need of additional supports beyond federal monies. This is where New Hampshire's state budget policy must be designed to stimulate economic growth and help people through these financially difficult times. The New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute in this February 8th, 2021 brief writes that existing research suggests policies that deploy resources directly to low-income residents, as well as those that support public services, employment, and infrastructure, are most effective at stimulating economic growth. Other policies, such as permanent tax reductions, appear to have a more limited impact. The recent position stated that the BPT and the BET rate reductions will stimulate an upward projection of revenue are contrary not only to this report, but to the following reports issued in 2019. The New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute had issued on May 22nd, 2019, this written statement in their issue brief. Several business tax reductions that have taken effect in New Hampshire do not appear to be responsible for the recent revenue increases, and policymakers should not expect to generate additional revenue through tax reductions. And if my colleagues across the aisle feel that this is just an unsubstantiated statement, there is within the September 10th, 2019 issue, a section titled Rate Reductions and Funding Ongoing Services. From 3 New Hampshire government units, the following projections about this type of tax rate cuts on revenue, quote, revenue projections from the governor, the legislature, and the New Hampshire Department of Revenue Administration's updated projections all show a negative impact on state revenues from tax rate reductions. The approach of the trickle-down philosophical approach of reducing the BPT and the BET is not backed up by any factual stipulations. I also urge my colleagues to look at the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute brief of February 8th, 2021. Closing, by reducing this critical revenue source, House Bill 10 will slow the economic recovery and affect state budget services to meet the greater needs among Granite Staters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Schamberg. Representative Gamal. You're muted.
So the techie forgets to unmute. All right. As a business owner, I do understand the desire to have lower business taxes, but our business pays about 8 times, actually a little bit more, in property taxes than we do in business taxes. So if reducing these tax rates increases my property tax and the taxes of the members of my town, especially the elderly, I think we need to think twice. 56% of New Hampshire households reported having difficulty paying normal expenses in the past 7 days. This was in a recent survey done last month by the Fiscal Policy Institute. We can't cut the revenue stream that helps our citizens in times of trouble. Keeping dollars in the hands of people is the biggest economic multiplier. Cutting business taxes is one of the lowest. I truly think this is a dangerous avenue to go down in these uncertain times. Uncertain times not only in regard to the pandemic economic impact, but I also worry about other legislation that may compound the effect of these reductions in revenue. And I also think we do have the lowest business tax in New England. Is that not correct? Anyways, I think we need to be in this together and try to take care of our populace now instead of trying to tempt business into New Hampshire with reducing our business taxes further. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Gamal. Representative Hacken Phillips.
Chair, I just wanted to respond to a couple of the arguments that have been presented this morning. First, from Representative Ulrey, his example of bringing up West Virginia's business tax cuts, he made the claim that, you know, the result of those business tax cuts was a revenue boom for the state. I think we just need to take a step back and recognize that West Virginia's variables for their economy were numerous, and that, you know, the cut of the business tax may not have directly correlated to the revenue increase. And I think specifically it's worthy to point out that West Virginia does have an income tax. So while that state's example is relevant to his argument, I think we have a more compelling case to look at, and that specifically relates to the state of Kansas. I'm not sure if everyone on our committee is familiar with that recent 2013 to 2017 experiment by the state legislature and the governor there. So as a brief rundown, I'd just like to remind everyone that in 2013, Governor Sam Brownback initiated a series of, I guess it was structured tax cuts for business taxes, as well as a reduction in the state's income tax to levels that were much, much lower than the previous experience. And over a series of 3 to 4 years, it was his experiment or his hypothesis that, you know, these results from those tax cuts would bring, I guess, like higher turnout, higher increases of job availability, as well as, you know, boosting this economic growth and making the overall constituents of Kansas richer because of those cuts. And, you know, the result of that hypothesis was just sheer economic destruction in the state, with a very difficult time of supporting their systems and programs across the board, and their budgets basically imploded. And I think, you know, you don't have to take my word for it. There are several worthy journalistic news articles about this, you know, series of 4 years, 4.5 years of this implosion. And, you know, the idea that trickle down economics is going to work on a state basis by reducing business taxes has been proven to have failed. The Kansas experiment is not something we need to repeat here in New Hampshire, and we can do better. We can learn from their mistakes, and we can, give our state the ability to boost our revenues, or at least keep them stable during a serious pandemic, as opposed to trying to recreate the same failed experiment in New Hampshire. We don't need to do Kansas's bidding here. So let's use our brains. Let's see the experience that other states have had and know that it was an abject failure and not be doomed to repeat that history here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Hacken Phillips.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak since I was mentioned?
Yes, Representative Early.
Representative Hacken Phillips' characterization of the Kansas experiment was rather partisan and not entirely accurate according to recent activities. If you take a look at your news feeds, you'll see that Kansas just rejected an increase in taxation. You'll also notice if you look at several of the different ranking systems that exist throughout the state, that Kansas ranks relatively high and higher than New Hampshire does in the tax burden on the taxpayers and their economic prosperity. The to me, biased information from the New Hampshire Fiscal Institute, having attended several of their lectures, it was purely anti-Republican and partisan. I disregard totally anything that they have to say because of their presentations that I've attended. That's I mean,
why don't we leave
at any rate, the point that I wish to make is that tax cuts work. They have worked. They have always worked. They've worked on a national level. They work on a state level, and Kansas is a hell of a lot better off than New Hampshire is as far as this tax burden is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. Good day.
Thank you, Representative Early. Representative Janjeen again.
Thank you, Janigian, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll get it right.
I just want to maybe take a look at this in a slightly different way. I agree with many of the things that Representative Baxter said, and also those who have talked about the decreases when businesses are increase in profitability when taxes are decreased. But I want to look at it a slightly different way as well. I think New Hampshire can potentially use. I mean, the COVID thing, yes, it's created a lot of uncertainty, but let's not forget that we are competing with other states. Let's make New Hampshire as competitive as possible. Let's win this thing. And basically, New Hampshire, as Massachusetts, for example, I just looked it up on their state website. They have an 8% business profits tax. At 7.5%, we begin to separate ourselves from Massachusetts. We're seeing that from states like New York. I mean, people are fleeing, businesses are fleeing states like California, New York, places where the tax burden is high. The COVID restrictions are high. While we do have COVID restrictions, they're nowhere as near as onerous as the states I just mentioned. So New Hampshire, so as people look around and say, you know, maybe we want to relocate to a state that has lower taxes, less restrictions, let's also look at our COVID numbers. I just looked at this morning's update, and it looks like we currently have about 3,170 active cases in the state, down from over 6,000 just about a month ago. We also have about 159 hospitalizations, down from over 350 about a month ago. So we are moving in a good direction, even though we're in February. This is typically a very cold month. Infections are typically high. And yet we're moving in a very positive direction as far as COVID cases. So I think we use this opportunity to let's make New Hampshire stand out. Let's think of this as a competition with other states, and not just if we reduce the tax 0.2%, it's not going to make any difference. Let's also think about how it affects people emotionally who want to move and relocate from other states. And that can be a huge boon to New Hampshire long term. So I just wanted to add that perspective to this discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Next is Representative Gorky.
It's Gorg. You've got the two of us back to back, the hard names. I just wanted to actually, the representative who just spoke, I completely agree with him. We are in a great direction, and to echo others, it's hard to change things when we are already in such a great position. And I also just a small comment, New Hampshire is so unique. We all know that. And the fact that we're comparing ourselves to other states that are not in the New England region is very difficult. I actually did just look up the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy has many articles actually about why the business tax cut failed. They ended up having horrible issues with this, and I would encourage everybody to do a little bit more research if we're comparing to them, especially with their education funding, which of course we're not unique in that. We do obviously have our education issues, but I mean, if we have a good thing going and people are moving here, and we've been told that our population is growing, now is not the time to mess with what we have. I don't know, since I'm new to the committee, why there's a sense of urgency to this, but I would love to see next year or the year after we look at this again and kind of ride it out for right now and see what ends up happening. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Representative. Next is Representative Elmy.
Oh, thank you already. First, I want to point out that Phil Sletton came out of the totally nonpartisan LBAO audit program. He has a very long history of extremely detailed data-driven analysis, and he has been trying for some time to balance between both parties. I realize that in the past, the Republicans even decided that the Center for Public Policy Studies, which was founded by a Republican and which had speaker, I'm losing names now, but had our only woman Republican speaker who was quite conservative on the board, and had a board that went from very far left to very far right and mostly in the middle. They were all committed to data analysis. The Republicans at that time started to try to characterize it as left-wing because there was no left-wing place. And I think that that's what is happening again. It is very unfortunate for data-driven research in this country, in this state. But I also wanted to point out that the whole country is going in the right direction at the moment on COVID, but that the medical community is very worried about this reversing with the variant spread right now in the whole country. And that we are a very small state with a unique, completely unique tax structure that people in other states always ask me, how do you do that? And we can't compare ourselves with giants that have the problems of giants in New York and California and Texas. So that being said, I wanted to point out another data-driven group, which does have a left side approach to things, but it has the best macro economic model for taxation outside of the Congressional Budget Office, and it has been doing that for 30 years. That is the DC-based Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP. In 2017, as the Congress prepared to pass massive federal tax cuts for the rich, ITEP wrote the following to the lawmakers. For more than 4 decades, supply-side ideologues have promoted the myth that tax cuts for the wealthy are self-financing and the benefits eventually trickle down to everyone else, despite real-life evidence that tax cuts for the rich benefit the rich. Not even the reality of 40 years of widening income inequality or the current economic expansion in which the benefits primarily flowed to wealthy households have stopped anti-tax proponents from peddling the enormous erroneous idea that top-heavy tax cuts will eventually benefit ordinary working people. We know also from the latest edition of ITEP's Who Pays that in 2017 in New Hampshire, the top 1% of families paid only 3% of their income in state and local taxes, whereas the lower 80% paid 6.5% to 9% of their income in taxes. Our business profits tax has been working against these inequities, slightly reducing the extreme advantage of our richest citizens. Because of this, the new business tax cuts will further erode tax equity in New Hampshire. And because they are slight and will have no effect whatsoever on the economy, except that they are going to cut services the businesses and the citizens need, this is also, this is not going to greatly reduce tax equity in New Hampshire, but it is the end of a long series of tax cuts, which have happened to coincide before the tax impact has been felt of those tax cuts, has happened to coincide with national level and state tax change on waves that are built into our system and into the federal system. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Almy. Representative Lockman.
Yeah, mute. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. You know, it was something that was well understood in the last term, and that's as we were sort of evaluating the impact of the tax cuts that were made, it was also made clear that the massive repatriation of profits and our ability to tax those profits resulted in a huge but temporary revenue boost, which really blurred the sort of return on investment assessment on how those tax cuts affected us. But it was made clear that a massive amount of revenue came from that temporary repatriation of funds, which is a federal law that was passed, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. We can't depend on that to happen again. We should not forget that that's where those revenues came from. And so the idea that those tax cuts paid for themselves, I think we know better. Secondly, you know, we should hesitate to compare business tax rates with other states. I think that's way too narrow a view, considering, you know, we don't have taxes that those states do. Also, our property taxes are a burden that those other states don't have. And I think the most appropriate way to assess the tax burden for businesses that want to come to New Hampshire or stay in New Hampshire is to look at things holistically. And we already have a very friendly business tax environment when you consider all the taxes that we don't have. And if we're really interested in making things easier for business, we should look at what we can do for property taxes. And finally, and just sort of kind of a personal opinion here. You know, we talk a lot about other states and the idea that businesses are fleeing these other states, and disregard completely that these states have massive economies, in part because of the investments they make in their infrastructure and education, which makes people want to invest with their businesses and with their families in those states. And it's always struck me as a bit disingenuous that we, you know, mock these states at the same time that we talk about wanting to pursue a greater and stronger economy for New Hampshire. We mock states that have rather impressive economies. So, you know, I agree that New Hampshire is a unique and special place and we should protect that. But, you know, investments, there's a difference between a cost and an investment. And I really fear for New Hampshire's future if we continue to divest at a time when I think we could be protecting these revenue streams, investing in education, lowering property taxes, and, you know, really investing in our future. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Lockman. Representative Abromney. You're muted, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've had our own experiment here. We have actual real data. If you looked at the graph that Representative Major used when he introduced the bill, from 2011 to 2015, our business tax growth was anemic. It averaged about $534 million annually, but there was really no growth going on. When you look at 2016 to 2020, that number jumped to 727 million average. So we compared average 5 years to another average 5 years, 534 million to 727 million, or 193 million growth. Yes, it is true in that math for the last 5 years was the repatriation, but also for the last year in that number, the 2020, there was a hit due to COVID, which kind of, I won't say it absolutely cancels out each other, but even if you said the 193 million average growth was too high, take out repatriation for that 1 year. You know, maybe the average is 150 million increase in revenues. I mean, if I came down from Mars and I looked at this graph and I said, wow, look at those first 5 years there. Boy, that's not much growth at all. And then it just jumped right off the scale when you look at the chart. And it all started in 2016 when we had our first incremental reduction in taxes. Again, I've no statistics. I know this is really a multivariate issue, but if we just focus on that, and the cause and effect is caused by many things, and the effect is and all of that. But I can't walk away by just looking at this chart by saying the tax cuts didn't have some positive impact on significant increases in our revenues from our businesses. And when we talk about education, we have to remind ourselves, we are ranked very, very high on our education system here, doing things the way we do them. We are the outcome measures, which is the most important thing. The outcome scores of our students in this state are extremely high compared to most other states. So, we can use all the arguments we want. All we're trying to do with this bill is to continue to stimulus our businesses to stay here and to move here. And I think from the chart that was handed out, and I find it hard to argue that there wasn't some success here. The only thing that you can argue is that maybe the repatriation helped, but even after the repatriation ended, even in the COVID year, we were significantly above where we were, 5 years ago or 4 years ago. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Bromley. Representative Elliott. You're muted, Bob. You're still muted, Bob. There you
Okay.
go. Yes.
Sorry about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding now that the businessman pays 35% of our state budget. And I also believe that many businesses are not in deep trouble right now, but many of them have gone out of business completely. So I look at this bill in a more simple way than the scholarly presentations that I've just heard, as a way of helping the businessman, because if I lower his tax bill by any measure, that to me is going to help him. And right now I feel that the businessman needs our help, and that's the whole purpose of this bill. Now, if I'm wrong, and if it doesn't work out in 2 years, we can always change the rate back to the present rate. And that way, the other side will have their victory as well. So I'll be brief. I'm in favor of this bill. I think it's time we help the businessman. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Elliott. Representative Tucker.
Yes, I wanted to read to you a letter that I got from a constituent that I actually don't know. And I did look her up on the voter list. She's an unenrolled voter. She lives in Whitefield, which is the largest of my towns in my district, COAS 5. And she wrote this to me, and she wrote it to 2 other elected officials from the legislature. As a resident, her name is Stephanie Kelleher. She lives at 148 Bray Hill Road in Whitefield. As a resident and property owner in Whitefield, I wanted to write and express my concern about the governor's plans to cut several business tax rates and the interest in dividends tax. She wrote this to me on the evening of January 28th. As New Hampshire residents, we already pay some of the highest property taxes in the country. And in Whitefield in particular, we pay higher than average compared to the rest of the state. Where do you expect to make up this extra money? And how do you expect people to continue living here if property rates continue to go up? Why would you eliminate a tax on interest in dividends? In reality, this tax only affects rich people, but getting rid of it will affect all of us who are struggling just to pay our property taxes. I think something needs to be done statewide to do something about our ridiculously high property tax rates. So I think this is not an unusual view by citizens, not only of the North Country, but across the state, as the state is picking up less of municipal costs, retirement costs. So when you go to a selectmen's meeting, you hear them talk about these things that are in the municipal budgets that they can't control, retirement costs being one of them. Other aspects of policing and so forth that people want to have, and it costs them more money now. And this difficulty that people are having with paying their property taxes, it means it's hard for young people to afford housing. Even if they can afford to buy the house, then they have to pay the property tax every year. And it affects the elder citizens. And here in northern New Hampshire, I'm typical. I'm an older citizen, and the property taxes become more difficult every year. So I ask you, not this year when we're struggling as a state, like the rest of the country, to deal with what this pandemic will mean to us, not to cut business taxes this year and not to support this bill.
Thank you, Representative Tucker. Representative Gamal, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break. Representative Gramalo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to point out that the numbers that came in, the final numbers for 2020 for the state in June, all that revenue in those past, would it be the 4 months of COVID, March, April, May, June? Those figures, those receipts were based on 2019 profits from various businesses. They had nothing to do with 2020. The only thing that had to do with 2020 is the estimates, which are based on 2019. So I don't think we can look at the final numbers for that year and say, oh, look, we did great, even in the time of COVID, because we weren't in the time of COVID in 2019. And everything that came in from January to June was based on 2019. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Okay, there's no other hands. Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll be back.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
there was one attendee that's had his hand up the whole time. I didn't know if you wanted to.
We'll take them first
Right after the break. Okay.
Okay. We should all be just about back now.
That was a nice idea, Mr. Chairman.
I think, just sitting too long.
Yeah.
All right. On House Bill 10, we've heard a lot of discussion. We're going to exec that tomorrow. And tomorrow, when it comes to the exec for House Bill 10, we don't want to repeat any of the discussion. If there's any new discussion, fine. But I think people know how they really want to vote on this. And the good reason that they feel they want to vote on this on each side. I don't think we're going to change anybody's views. So when we get back to House Bill 10 tomorrow, unless there's new information, I think we need to vote on it.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
there was apparently, I have no idea who it was, someone who had their hand up for quite a long time before, and you said you'd take him or her after.
Okay, Jefferson Chickering.
Want me to allow him to talk?
Is Jefferson, does he want to talk on House Bill 10?
I don't have a way to know that.
Because we're in a work session now and discussing among ourselves, and if it's on House Bill 10, yes.
I guess I'll have to let him talk and tell us if it is, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You are given permission to talk. You have been given permission, Mr. Jefferson. Mr. Chickering, sorry.
Mr. Jefferson, is this relative to House Bill 10?
It is not. I had raised my hand to talk about House Bill 528, but I was just sitting and listening to all the other bills. So it is not related to House Bill 10.
Okay, then.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right. If we go on to House Bill 15, House Bill 15 shouldn't take that long. I should never say that. But on House Bill 15, hold on a second. An act relative to including under the Meals and Rooms tax facilitators of internet transactions of motor vehicle rentals and facilitators of internet transactions of room occupancies. And talking with Representative Almy, with an indication that most of her caucus is going to support an order to pass on this. And in the Republican caucus, it's about the same, but there's an open question about a new tax. And we need to get that answered. What I'd like to do is have the DRA there tomorrow and get an answer. Is this a new tax? And so what we'll do is we'll hold this until tomorrow, get that answer, and then I think we can go into the executive session if there's if anybody doesn't have any additional to talk about on that.
There are two hands raised.
Representative Schomburg.
Mr. Chairman, if we're going to hold this till you get an answer, would that be the time when I should maybe make my presentation on what I think about this being a new tax?
Matter of fact, you could do that right now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill, House Bill 15, as introduced by the prime sponsor from Londonderry, is contrary, I think, to the prime sponsor's viewpoint. It is a new tax on New Hampshire small, independent entrepreneur business individuals who are willing to fill a niche that the regular brick and mortar business models have left unattended. These small independent entrepreneur business owners provide a personal interaction for what's best in their community and New Hampshire. They found a way to promote themselves and their personal services. The prime sponsor says passing this bill will level the playing field. How? Doesn't this give the established brick and mortar business models an advantage because of their deep and established money pockets? My colleague from Greenland, who chaired the subcommittee on this issue last year, did an excellent job of delving into the mechanics of these platforms, which gives the small independent business owner and private individuals another way to promote their services. These small business owners need as many platforms as possible. These platforms are like the old bulletin board outside the grocery or feed store, where you could pin up your service card to hopefully have someone contact you. We are now in the 21st century. I say this is a new tax versus the prime sponsor's opinion. What the prime sponsor has done in House Bill 15 is to broaden the definition of operator and rental of the vehicle, usually private person, to now be that the term operator shall include a rental facilitator and a room facilitator. Isn't this new? Doesn't this and including taxing a new identity? I heard from the prime sponsor earlier this year say, we want to reduce your taxes. How does this reduce the small business entrepreneur's tax when he/she didn't have one before? Isn't this a new regulation that wasn't here before? I heard the prime sponsor early in this new year say, we want to reduce regulation so that businesses can expand. They can hire more people, attract more business to the state of New Hampshire, creating more jobs, quote. Is another burden on the small business owner? Didn't have this government. Will they stay in business? What happened to reducing the size of state government in New Hampshire? The small business, independent entrepreneurs, a personal interaction for what's best in their community and all New Hampshire. Many do this as a way to improve their financial security, especially during the COVID pandemic. These small independent entrepreneurs are looking for provide for themselves and family. This new tax on facilitators is being to be included under the meals tax. As I have said, the prime sponsor said early in January, we don't access at this particular point where we have to make sure businesses succeed. Businesses get back open again, and they put people back. Raising taxes is not on the table. I guess broadening the definition of an operator or a private car rental is not a tax increase, service owner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Schoenberg. Representative Alamy.
Did anybody hear me?
Who else was talking?
Yes, Tom, we heard you.
Yeah, yes, we heard you. I'd like to ask the previous speaker if he has any evidence that any of the remote facilitation work is being done by small businesses in local towns. For a very long time and currently, the brick and mortar real estate agents in small towns have been collecting and paying this tax for their clients who are renting their
I can't hear you.
homes. You can't?
We can, Tom.
Oh. Oh dear, do I have to start from the beginning? Because I was addressing a question to the previous speaker. Can you hear me?
She's in and out. I guess I'm too
Okay.
close to Lebanon.
You were
Okay.
going out too, Tom.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yeah, he said he could.
Yes. Okay. I'm
No, I
sorry.
do not have any, Susan, I don't have any facts or data on that. This is all
Okay.
philosophical approach.
Okay, well, I will continue then. The
Okay.
current small businesses that do collect and pay this tax, that are resident in our towns in New Hampshire and have clients who are usually from out of state with second homeowners. They rent their places out to people. Those facilitators are brick and mortar, and they are already collecting and paying this tax to the DRA. The DRA also goes after people that on a less on frequent basis will rent out a room. For instance, I had a guy who was quite upset about it, who got caught in Lebanon because he had decided that he could help pay for his apartment's rent by renting out the back room to visiting nurses. And he hadn't realized that he owed a tax on that. Under our current law, he does. And I had to tell him that. This is the situation right now for rooms. For cars, the only information that we have found has been very large on remote facilitators who are working nationwide from other states and who have the bandwidth to advertise their product widely over the websites. And I don't know, theoretically, a single small facilitator of that type could develop in New Hampshire. But we haven't heard from anyone that was trying to do that. And it does take quite a lot to make yourself nationally known. Sometimes it requires a certain amount of creativity, and could happen. But given that, what we are just trying to do is to even the playing field between the remote sellers that are selling a product that is in the same manner as the people that are brick and mortar that are resident within our state. And that is not a new tax. That is making the tax fairer to the same businesses. And under our Constitution and the Supreme Court generally decide when you go to them to that effect. But we are waiting, as I understand, for the Department of Revenue Administration to answer that question.
Okay, Representative Bromley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was on that subcommittee with that Representative Malloy chaired last year. You know, we spent a lot of time on this bill trying to get the language correct. We worked with Sean Thomas, who unfortunately is no longer with the DRA, but he's a lawyer who wrote most of this language. And we went through a whole bunch of iterations on it. But philosophically, yes, and there's some questions in our caucus about the language. And that's why we do want to hear, not from me, but from other members of our caucus, that we want to hear from DRA. And I think we'll get satisfaction once we hear from DRA on some of the meaning of certain things. But it is, I mean, we're not talking mom and pop here. You know, we're talking Airbnb, we're talking on the room side in Toro, who's getting bigger by the day on the auto side. And we view this, and we viewed it last year as a committee, as a fairness issue between the brick and mortar and the, you know, hey, we're in the, 21st century now with all these platforms that are out there. We felt it was appropriate to tax, and all the facilitator does, the facilitator is not being taxed. The facilitator is making sure that the person renting the car from another individual or renting the room from another individual tax on the room and meals, not the room and meals, the room and meals tax, which is the and the 5%, and collects that. His job is to collect that, not tax him. We're actually taxing the person who rents the room and rents the car, instead of from a brick and mortar operation, from an e-commerce operation. And so that I just wanted to say those things, and we'll see what happens tomorrow when we have the DRA's input. Thank you.
Representative Spilsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had no involvement in this bill. My exposure to it is purely in the work of this committee in the last couple of weeks and in reading the language. I don't find anything to be ambiguous or controversial about this bill. I think the bill is plainly and well written. I view it from a marketing perspective. The product hasn't changed. What's happened is a new channel of distribution has been introduced. And that channel of distribution is simply a new innovation in marketing. It's just simply a different form of booking agent. So I would grant some of what Representative Schomburg said. The definition of operator has been expanded to include these new innovative entities. And so we have rental facilitator and room facilitator. They're both defined, and they're defined very much in parallel. If you look at line 25 on the primary page of the bill, the subject that's being, or product that's being taxed is, quote, rental of a motor vehicle to a renter. All of the words that come before that are just descriptors of a variety of marketing agents. So rental facility means any person having any right, access, ability, or authority to offer, reserve, book, arrange for, remarket, distribute, broker, resell, coordinate, or otherwise facilitate. What? Rental of a motor vehicle to a renter. Rental of a motor vehicle to a renter is the product. It hasn't changed. The exact same structure occurs in the definition of room facilitator on page 2. In line 3, what's being taxed? Occupancy to an occupant. The addition of someone facilitating doesn't change that. So it's not a new tax. And as Representative Arawi just said, the person being taxed is the person who's renting the room or the car. All we're asking the facilitator to do is be responsible for collecting it when the transaction is booked. That's all.
Thank you, Representative Spilsbury. Representative Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, on this bill, I agree with Representative Almy, and as Abrami and others have said about the issue of fairness. The market's changing, and a pro-growth and just a fair policy is applying a tax equally to different businesses of the same tax. So this bill is not intended to create a new tax. I do think there's a concern about this potentially applying to travel agents as it's written, which I know is not the intent of anyone. So I think literally just a one sentence amendment in there saying this shall not apply to travel agents would be important. And I think that's why it's important to continue to tweak this, but I think the bill is pretty close. So, hopefully we can tweak it. And then there sounds like there's a wide amount of support among the committee, and then we can get this done.
Thank you, Representative Baxter. Representative Southworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I support this bill for two reasons. First, I really think the idea of fairness is very important. And secondly, for those who weren't there, our subcommittee did a very thorough job researching this bill. And so I think what we came up with was just based on a lot of research. Thank you.
Representative Almy.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I just wanted to suggest we add the travel agent question to the DRA's list.
Yes.
Because I was under the impression that if it's a room that they would pay, I'm not sure. And I mean, they don't pay, they collect and send it on. And that the same thing would apply to cars, but I'm not sure.
Any other comments? Representative Bromley, you have a hand up?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where a travel agent fits in this whole discussion. I guess a travel agent, if someone said they wanted to go to their let's say they have a travel agent they use all the time, and they said they wanted to rent a room through Airbnb, all the travel agent would do, I would imagine, I'm guessing here, would be to contact Airbnb, which is the platform, the middleman, to in turn find a room for them to rent. Or a house or whatever it might be. So I'm not quite sure. And then there'd be a different financial relationship between the travel agent and the facilitator, or Airbnb, in this case, Airbnb. And I don't see where in this language there'd be a tax on it, but we can ask, that's a good question, Representative Baxter, that let's clarify it and put it to bed once for all. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Tudor has a question.
Representative Tudor.
I think the question on travel agency comes in on line 15 of the first page of the bill, where it basically says occupancy without any deduction of any kind, including any fee, service, or other charge required to be paid by the occupant to a room facilitator. I think the travel agency's concern is that their service fee that they tack on to make money is being taxed, not just the car or the room.
Okay. Representative Spilsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think what was just said is accurate, but not the point. A fee that's tacked on as a booking fee, it's a marketing expense, it's part of the process and the total cost of selling the product.
Representative Bernstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too was on the committee last term, the subcommittee that looked at this bill, and I have the bill pulled up on my screen. It was HB 1558 from 2019. And the current iteration of this bill expands the scope of the bill. And that's why I'm just not, I still haven't rendered a final decision on how I'm going to vote. I just have some concerns that this bill is much more inclusive than the 19-line bill we looked at 2 years ago. 2 years ago, there was no mention of taxing fees or services. It was simply a question of fairness between the platform that Turo is operating on as compared to rental car agencies. But now all of a sudden, there's new language regarding fees and services, and I'm reluctant to support it because I think that perhaps we're casting too wide of net. I I'm looking forward to hearing from DRA so we can get some interpretation of some of this language. But this is not the bill we looked at 2 years ago.
Representative Bromley.
Jump in. When you pull that up, did you pull up the original? You got to make sure when you're looking at the bill, it should be the bill that we voted on at the end, not as introduced. We did a lot of amending to the bill that went to the floor that we all passed. So can you please double check that?
I'm looking at the original bill, and you're correct, Representative Abrami, and I will pull out the version we voted on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative, I don't see any other hands. So looks like we can move on and bring this up again tomorrow, and hopefully we get the DRA have them available to be able to answer that. The next is I'm going to skip over 210, but go to House Bill 306. And House Bill 306 relative to the revenue estimates while operating under emergency orders caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. And Susan, you had an amendment you were considering on that?
Yes, we were worried, and I was particularly worried, having had to deal with this for a long time, that this is our normal practice at this point, that when the economy is shifting, we do revenue estimates more often. And both of us have had trouble getting agencies at some points to cooperate with that. And so I understand your intent in doing this, but in limiting it to just the emergency executive orders under COVID and the fiscal years 21 to 23, we are sending a signal that we are no longer, when we need to do so, going to be able to tell the agencies, look, we have to do these revenue estimates on a more frequent basis. And so I wanted to suggest that you take out everything amended and take out everything relevant to the fiscal years 21, 23 and to COVID pandemic and maybe even emergency orders, because we have quite frequently had shaky economies at the same time without emergency orders being used. In fact, these are the first emergency orders since the bill put them in, I think, in our first year in 1996.
Do you have a language that you would recommend for a representative?
I don't, but I could write it in 5 minutes after we finish.
That'll be fine, and we can bring it up tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next is House Bill 330.
Mr. Major, my hand was up. My hand was up on the last bill.
On 306?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Real quick, Representative Almy, I agree 100%. Should broaden it. And do we think we can get an amendment by tomorrow? I don't know how quick they work over in OOS these days.
I know they promised me an amendment, I think by the end of today, when I sent to them late last night on another bill.
Okay.
So I think something like this, that was also a very simple thing, and we'll be getting to it, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. House Bill 330. An act relative to sports book locations. And discussion. Representative Almy.
Thank you. This is the other bill that I was talking about. We had felt strongly on our side, we had agreed with Representative Abrami that the cap should not be lifted at this point. And so I sent for an amendment which would allow Tier 2 sports wagers to go forward, but avoid removing the cap.
Okay.
And I think we discussed that before when we were hearing the bill about the importance of starting smaller and testing it out.
And so you're going to have an amendment that keeps.
Yes. Yes, it's already being done in OLS.
Okay. Representative Doucette, you have something to say?
Yes, I'm glad to hear that we all have an understanding of the Tier 2 system where, you know, we've got these 2 brick and mortar facilities, and people apparently that go there to do some sports wagering or have dinner or whatever have to go on their mobile devices to make bets that they can't make at the brick and mortar places. Along the lines of the expansion of, you know, the 10 brick and mortar facilities, and if Charlie McIntyre is still on the call, like we spoke of briefly yesterday, Mr. Chairman, I think both the lottery and the vendor DraftKings have a lot to say in that. And it's my understanding, so I don't think there'd be a problem with that being amended. It's my understanding that they don't expect to get to the 10 locations as it is. So.
Okay, Charlie is one of the attendees. I could bring him in.
Yes, he is.
Can you bring him in?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Charlie.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Charlie McIntyre, Hampshire Lottery here. I believe the question is, do we anticipate getting to 10 locations in any time soon? The answer is no. So we have 2 now. We have 2 more we're looking at actively, and a 5th one potentially. So within the next 2 years, it would be incredibly unlikely we would exceed 10.
Okay, so that shouldn't be a problem with the proposed amendment.
I don't, sir, no.
Okay. Any other questions we want to ask Charlie? Representative Bromley?
Yeah, this actually is a question for Charlie. So my hypothesis that I threw out there the other day when this bill was being introduced was, would it be a disincentive to people, given that there's a high risk here, and to vendor, and then there's only so many people who are going to be willing to wager on sports betting in the state. Plus, we still have the apps on their people's phones, so not everybody's going to go to a brick and mortar place. So if I was thinking of jumping in as a business to being a location for this, would it be a disincentive to them to jump in knowing that there's an unlimited number of locations potentially that would eat into the total number of total number of people that are going to bet anyway? That was my only hypothesis. That I don't know the answer to that. I just don't know if you have an opinion on that, knowing what you do about these folks that run the charitable gaming locations or other locations that may want to jump into this.
I mean, and certainly we haven't had the issue yet, only because they have been so separated in terms of the locations. I imagine that's the case, that a business would be less likely to invest significant capital in making it a first-class outfit. I can tell you that the customer base between the physical locations and the mobile is entirely different. Folks who go to the physical locations are folks who just aren't comfortable with their phone or like being in person, and tend to be older and wealthier. Folks who do it on, use the phone and computer, tend to be younger and not as wealthy and bet much less per wager, if that makes sense.
Yep. Okay. That actually does make sense, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Tucker.
We had a brief discussion yesterday, thanks to Representative Abrami, about how it worked out for New Hampshire on the Super Bowl game. And maybe in a paragraph, you could explain it.
Representative Tucker, not to get ahead of myself, I've been answering the question, but I've been asked to present to you folks next week on this very question. So I was going to prepare something ahead of it. I'm not ready yet.
We'll wait till next week on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Charlie or anybody? I see no more hands up. So then tomorrow, hopefully we'll have that amendment.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
That leaves us, I believe, with two bills left. They're kind of similar. House Bill 210. And 568. Now, 210 is an act increasing exemptions under the interest and dividend tax and decreasing the total amount of research and development credits against the business taxes. House Bill 568 is an act increasing the exemptions to the interest and dividends tax and repealing the tax in 2025. Let's first go to House Bill 210. Representative Abrami.
It's 210 Lang's bill.
That is Tim Lang's bill, right?
Right.
That's.
I think there's, well, at least I'll speak to our caucus, and I forget about the caucus first. I mean, I kind of supported the idea of increasing the exemptions, and it seems like our caucus agrees to that. Now, the degree to that, how much they should be increased, is still being debated within our caucus at this point. So, and I think we're also all in agreement that if we do something, we should not reduce the R&D tax credit. I think we heard some testimony during our hearings a couple of weeks ago from businesses that, well, two of them anyway, that told us why they didn't see that as a good idea. And I think the BIA and other organizations like that are really discouraging us to do that. I mean, this is a carryover bill from a couple of years ago where we were making an attempt to make this a budget neutral thing, that we would reduce the increase the exemptions but pay for it by reducing the R&D tax credit money. So yeah, I think I think as a caucus we're going to come down one way or another on this, but I don't think we're there yet. Other than those two principles are definitely the R&D reduction in R&D tax credit, and because I'm also thinking of the other bill as well when I'm making the statement. And that this is one of those we hope that all of us can kind of come together on a happy medium here, so as best we can. But anyway, that's where my mind is on this, and I don't think our caucus is solidified behind a final recommendation.
Representative Elmer, you want to speak?
Thank you. This tax is a very difficult one for my caucus because, as I said yesterday, on that triangle represents people at all income levels in all of the lower level taxpayers. The first three layers at least of low-level taxpayers. And some of them are low-level, but very wealthy otherwise. Since we do not have an income tax, there's no way to do a reasonable exemption that for the poorest people who depend on that money, without also giving the exemption to people that for whom that is just a very small part of a very large income that they have. And so I think we would be, the exemptions haven't been raised for a very long time, and partly because of that reason. And the tax provides a very significant amount of money to our budget. So we would be, I think, open to discussing an exemption that was lower than the one that is in here, that would target to the lowest amounts that are paid. It would also reduce the paperwork for a huge number of people that are now paying nothing or $1, but have to file because they come in and out of that exemption level. And I'd like to see the chair ask DRA to model how much it would cost at a couple of different exemptions of his choice that were in between what the bill offers, which is about $6 million usually of money to us, to our budget, and no increase in the exemption. So, and I think that they must be able to do that since they could do the triangle.
And you haven't mentioned anything about the R&D tax.
Oh, and yeah, we would rather not at this time consider reducing the R&D tax credit. We have been getting some more information from the people that are using it. It would be really nice if we could get the Business and Economic Affairs or the DRA to provide more information about how it's being used.
So you want the incremental increase or decrease in taxes for increase in the exemption.
Yes, how much it would cost the budget,
right,
and our revenue estimates to put the exemption at 2,000 or at 2,200. I forget where.
It starts at 2,400.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to remember. I don't know why I've been paying this for years. Why it why it sticks in my head is 1,800. But just go up above 2,400 at $200 increments.
In $200 increments?
Well, make the exemption 2,600 and see what that does. Make the exemption at 2,800 and see what that does.
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
And bigger steps than that.
About 3,000.
Because like going from 2,400 to the bill says 3,500.
Yes, it does. But if we
going from 2,400 to 3,500, I guess it's about $5 million if they want to reduce the research and development tax credit to $5 million. Yeah. I see why you're saying $200 increments.
Yeah. The question is how many of those people are, well, for one thing, some of them are couples with who are over 65 and they get more money, more exemption. But how many of those people who are paying $100 to $500, for instance, are actually covered by a 2,600, a 2,800, a 3,000 exemption? And I think that the DRA probably can just push a button and get that.
Okay. Anything else on this particular bill? Representative Janigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just a couple of points. One is I am for increasing the exemption to, which would help people on the lower scale there. And even at, but if you only increase it by 200, 5% of 200 is $10. So you'd only be relieving that taxpayer of $10. So you probably do need bigger, and I would be for a bigger increase. The other point I wanted to make it, and it sounds like everyone is for not coupling these, or most are for against not coupling this with the research and development tax credit. I mean, in my mind, effectively, you're trying to couple a personal tax with a exemption that helps businesses, and probably not a good idea to be mixing personal and business taxes. So, but anyways, I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Baxter.
I just wanted to speak to what Representative Janigian just said. I think he made a couple of great points. Regardless of what you think of the R&D tax credit, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have that be a part of the question on interest and dividends tax. You're mixing personal with business. And I agree with what he said, that a lower exemption wouldn't necessarily have a significant impact. And even in House Bill 568, even going through that that schedule of raising the exemptions, we're still going to be able to keep the brunt of the revenue coming in, because it's very much top heavy. So I think it's important that we continue to discuss this and listen from experts, and we'll have more debates and discussions about what the correct number is, and whether we go with 568 or scale it back. But I think we're still at the point where all members of the committee are still thinking about what their position is on the issue.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Baxter. Representative Almy.
Yeah, could I just add something that I don't think people may be thinking about, which is that a lot of the people in that 0 payment and 1 to 500 payment are elderly people who have to file because of where the exemption is now, and who have to find all of their income reports, which can be difficult, and take them down to the senior center or wherever and have a volunteer do it for them, or they may feel that they have to pay H&R Block to do it for them, which is going to cost them more money, a lot more money than what they're paying us. And that raising the exemption just a little bit relieves an awful lot of those people of the paperwork burden and possible cost of an accountant. Thanks.
Representative Ames.
Thank you. Yeah, this just commenting on that last observation by Representative Almy, it triggered a thought. We have in this tax a elderly exemption as well, and this bill, I believe, raises that along with the base exemption. I assume that. I don't have it right in front of me. But in any event, there is data that the DRA has on people who are over 65 because of that exemption. And it should be easy to access. I think it would be very helpful to all of us to understand the degree to which older people, 65 years and over, are in fact participants in this tax and to what degree they're benefiting from the current exemptions to the extent to which DRA is able to provide that. So that's just sort of an added part of the request to DRA that I'm requesting.
Okay, I just want to check the attendee. Melissa Rollins is on. Can you unmute Melissa?
She's unmuted.
Melissa, you've heard this discussion. Do you have anything you can add at this point in time?
Sure. Actually, if you could unmute Devin Roderick, he did the fiscal note for this bill and has some of the answers to you, specifically for the over 65. I think he has the counts on that exemption.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. This is Devin Roderick, Department of Revenue. Looking at tax year 2019 data for the I&D tax, of the 70,437 I&D returns filed, and I can send you these numbers after.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I will. 37,343 returns claimed exemptions. Those exemptions totaled, and I'll break them down in a second for you. Those exemptions total 53,059. So when we look at those total number of exemptions, some of those returns may claim, of course, more than one exemption, depending on the qualifying factor. Of those 53,059 exemptions, 36,360 were 65 or older or disabled. 228 claim the blind exemption, and 16,471 claimed the spouse being blind, 65 or older or disabled. So the spouse exemption is all grouped together. That's based on the way our forms are the way the taxpayer completes our forms and the data that we have. And we can most certainly take a look at what Representative Helmy asked for a few minutes ago at those varying levels of the actual income exemption at levels of 2,600, 2,800, and 3,000. We can take a look at that and get back to the committee with what that would look like.
Okay, and you'll send that to us, and then I can make sure it gets to the committee.
Thank you very much.
Any questions of the DRA while we have them on? Representative Ames?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to comment briefly on the other half of the bill. It's this research and development tax credit, and say that I do agree with taking that out. But I want to say that the reason it was in there, I believe this is true, Representative Abrami can correct me if I'm wrong, was that the thought of the proponents of the bill originally was that they wanted to present a balance so that the revenue that would be lost by the increased exemptions would be balanced by revenue that would be gained from something else. And what they chose was the research and development piece. I've always opposed the bill actually for that reason, because I didn't want to go with that, with removing that tax credit. But I do support in general this effort to present a balance when we cut revenues, trying to show how we'll match the cut. And sort of as a general principle, if we keep this low enough, and I think that's what we're talking about here, it's a relatively small amount of money. And it's certainly the need for increasing the exemptions is, I think, is very real, and relates to the fact that they haven't been raised for years and years and years. I don't know how long it's been. So that's good. I guess I wish we could go much higher on the exemptions, but then we get into big money. So there's a balance here, and going up some makes sense to me. Let's get a good handle on the costs and go into it with our eyes open. So that's what I wanted to say.
Chair, can I respond since my name was mentioned?
Representative Bromley.
Yep, thank you. So yeah, I'm trying to recall the genesis of all of this, but when I've been in legislation now 11 years now. So when I first was, let's say 10 years ago, the tax exemption, the tax credit for R&D was $1 million. That was it. And then we agreed a year or two after that maybe we House and Senate both agreed to raise it by $1 million. Then somewhere along the line, I think in the next budget, the Senate, again, acting on its own, put into HB2 that tax credit would be increased by $5 million. And in a bipartisan way on this committee, we were not happy with that. We were not happy that they did this without conferring with us. Again, once again, they just put it in there. And, it's the magic of HB2, I call it. Things happen in HB2. So I think the bill came to us about the exemptions, and I'm guessing, I can't recall exactly, but it was midterm. It was after the budget was set. We wanted to do this. We thought it would be higher probability of passing if we made it budget neutral because the budget had already been set. So we took a bill that came to us probably the second year of the 2 years, and we said, well, let's pay for it. And that's where the reduction came from. But I don't think it passed because it didn't, I can't recall now, but it obviously didn't go anywhere because it's still a $7 million tax credit. But that's kind of the history of it. Representative me, if you want to jump in to say, correct me if I was wrong about some of the feelings we had about the tax credit going historically, I'd appreciate it.
I think Representative Spilsbury was
okay.
Next, and then we'll go to Representative Almy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, I like Representative Almy's request to model the increments, but I would ask specifically that while DRA is doing that they also model the increments that are proposed in these two bills. So in 210, 3,500, and in 568, a progression of 4,800, 7,200, and 9,600. Let's see all the scenarios.
Fine. Devin, did you hear that?
Sure thing. We'll definitely include that in our analysis.
Okay, thanks, Devin.
Representative Major,
Yes.
there's a phone on our panel that I don't know who it is. I don't recognize.
Would you say the last two numbers?
The last two numbers are 778.
778.
Schamberg.
Oh, okay. Well,
For 35 minutes, I haven't heard anything.
Oh, no.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Sorry.
I'm just listening. Thank you.
I'm going to rename you. Is that okay?
I don't care how you rename me.
You got to talk to his mother first.
All right. You're also Representative Spilsbury. You're muted.
All set.
Okay, thank you. Representative Ober.
Yes, just a comment on the past. If you remember, I was actually on Ways and Means when we went through this rigmarole about how to give money away to the people that do tech. And we went from 1, we went to 2, and there was a big discussion when we went to $2 million about what are we getting for our money. And the tech company said, well, we're going to give you more people, we're going to hire people, our business is going to expand. But we never heard what actually happened. And it moved to 7 million without our even knowing about it. And we still don't know all those people that are getting this tax deferral. We don't know that they're doing anything with that money. Are they hiring more people? Is their business expanding? Are they doing good with that money? Or are they just saying, hey, this is free money, let's keep going at it? Thank you.
Put that on the list of questions that need to be addressed. Anybody else with questions for the DRA or Representative Elmy?
I guess this is a question for the DRA because we keep getting told by the Business and Economic Affairs Department, or whatever it's called now, all I know is BEA, that they can't answer us because they don't know who the people who took the credit are. And the DRA is the only one who knows who took the credit. Is there some way to be able to get more information about well, what concerns me most is how much our credit is relative to what they get from the federal government. And we do know in the case of the person in Representative Ames' district that it's about 25%, which I thought it would be less than that. And I've been worried that we were just a flea on the tail of the dog and that we were spending money with no real impact. And we've been asking for years for this, and they told us that they couldn't reply. And I'm hoping DRA can figure out some way that, discussing it with BEA, that they could get some responses from some of the other people that have been involved with this program and what they actually did with the money. Every time we increase the credits, more people sign up for it because it's more worth the paperwork to them. And the original intent was to help the struggling businesses at the bottom that were in research and development and that are the future of our economy. Thanks.
This is going to be a separate issue to be able to put our hands around. This whole issue of the R&D tax credit and the benefits that were as a result of it. What have they been? And so we don't have a specific bill for that. It refers to it in this bill. So I'll put something together. Maybe it have to be an ad hoc committee to look into that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, the Tax Expenditure Committee was going to start trying to look at this year, and the Senate seems to have decided to cut its size down to 3 people.
Okay.
It was in last year's one of their big bills.
I do not know who the chairman of the Tax Expenditure Committee is going to be this year. Representative Ames, did you get put on that this year?
Not to my knowledge.
I had recommended you. Okay, I will find out. But we need to pursue this. Any further questions on this issue? To kind of sum up, on House Bill 210, I think the vast majority thinks we should divorce the R&D development from the interest and dividend credits. And our question then is, on increments of changes from a couple $100 increments, what is that going to cost us? We need to look at that. Some people are just persistent. Let us go to 568 now. And 568 is increasing the exemption to the interest and dividend tax until eventually repealing it in 2025. It has a lot of the same arguments that we had on 210. So I'm open to hear what you have to discuss on this bill. This is one, if it's approved, it would eventually settle down to about $110 million hit each year to our budget, to our revenues. Representative Southworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm opposed to this bill. Again, I think we have too many variables going on, and I don't really see an upside to reducing revenue. I could give a long spiel, but I think to just say briefly, my main concern is the result will be downshifting more costs to property taxpayers. And I guess the two big things I see happening in the next 2 years are we don't really know what's happening with meals and rooms tax, and we also don't know what exactly is going to happen with public education. And those are big, big things. And, you know, I'm not sure it's a time to cut revenue. Thank you.
And if we don't know, if the vast majority, we don't know the answers to these questions,
Yeah.
it would mean that we need to either retain it or ITL it. But
And I would support retention, except I don't think we're going to know much about COVID and some of that within 1 year.
Let's hear from somebody else. Representative Abrandi, followed by Representative Almy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm personally not in favor of the end point with the total reduction of this tax. This is something we're working through in our caucus, and we're working on it. And that's why I view the two bills, the 210 and this together. Somehow we got to combine these two and come up with a strategy that at least, you know, that we can agree to. We may not come to a total agreement between the caucuses, but again, I think eliminating $111 million in a couple of years of revenue, that's a hard one to follow for me. And I think it's a different dynamic than the business tax cuts. And we could talk about that at some other time, but I don't think it'll work the same way as business tax cuts. So in terms of generating more revenue than not. So that's where I personally stand on it. And we'll be working in our caucus to come up with some kind of a strategy here. Thank you.
Representative Almy.
Thank you. This is 225 million a year, a biennium for our biennial budget. It is a very significant amount of money. We don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, what'd you say, 225 million?
Per biennium, it's
Oh, per biennium.
225 million.
Okay.
And we don't know where that would come from. We wouldn't, maybe we would have to cut the community colleges and training programs on which our economy depends. Maybe we would certainly be, given the way people have been in the past, be cutting out the substance abuse programs that our businesses depend on. At least in my community, the businesses sure depend on it. There are the courts would suffer. We would have longer waits in the courts. The courts are already heavily backed up. Before COVID, they were heavily backed up. There's a whole range of government services that both our families and our businesses depend on. We cannot, in the modern age, run a government with run a state, have a state or a nation without a government. Anarchy is not an option. So I really am totally opposed to further cuts in an already very closely budgeted state. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Almy. Anybody else wish to speak on this? All right. Timetable.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was slow to get to the unmute button at the end there, but I just wanted to point out that this text goes way back in time. Oldest, if you look at DRA's annual report, you'll see that that we first had tax on interest income that goes back to
Oh, you muted, you muted.
You muted yourself, Representative Ames.
yes, okay, am I back on board?
Yes.
Got to watch out for this cursor. So this is a longstanding tax, and it began in 1923. And according to the DRA annual report, it was in 1965, I think. There's a typo here. Could have been 75, when the rate of 5% was settled upon. So it's been at that 5% rate at least since 1975. It's a steady part of our revenue structure. I see no reason to change that now, and I hope I hope that we'll reject that part of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Ames. Representative Spilsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A very quick question. Does anyone know when the exemption was last adjusted?
Just had it open.
The LBA report should tell you that. How about Devin or Melissa? Would you know the
Yes.
answer to that?
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. This is Devin Roderick, Department of Revenue. Going off of that our annual report from fiscal year 2020 that Representative Ames was mentioning a minute ago, the exemption was increased to $1,200 in 1981, and then the threshold was increased to $2,400 shortly thereafter. So the effective date of that was September 3rd, 1981, I believe.
You're saying that the 2,400 has been in place for 40 years?
I wasn't around then, but I believe, based on my interpretation, I believe so, yes.
God, you
I
asked
think it
the
needs an
right
adjustment.
Representative Spilsbury, do you have any further questions?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Bernstein.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add a layer onto Representative Spilsbury's last comments. If you go to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have a CPI calculator. Now, and if you plug in a $2,400 exemption from July of 1981, that would be equivalent to it would be equivalent to over $6,800 today. So if the intent of this tax was to capture a certain economic tier, then we haven't adjusted this for inflation. And just the bottom line is $2,400 in 1981 is equal to $6,850 today. I'll just ask you to consider that.
You make a good point.
Thank you.
Representative Alme.
Thank you. This is why this tax is very difficult for my caucus. When the interest and dividends tax was created somewhere around 1913 or 17, it was meant to tax the people who were fairly wealthy because they were the only ones with dividends and interest in the bank. And it has, over time, as things have changed, it has come to tax a large number of people that really don't have very much money to live on. But it is also a significant part of our tax structure and does tax on a lot of people who have a huge amount of money to live on in their old age. So it's a very difficult issue. I agree, but we would have to find a replacement for the revenue, or it would go on the local property tax as part of it, and another part of it would be services disappearing that both the businesses and the citizens need. So that's the question.
Representative Tucker.
Yes, I had a concern when members of both caucuses have been talking about dealing with this issue within their caucus, because I think this issue is one that we need to hear each other's views. As just this conversation has been going on, we've learned new facts about how long exemption has been in place, how long the tax has been in place. So I hope that you will allow for both caucuses to be able to, individual members, to be able to raise questions and concerns. I think it's a really difficult issue, and we all need to hear each other.
I hope this is what we're doing right now.
Yes, I think we are.
Representative Bromley, followed by Representative Bernstein.
Yeah, my comment about our caucus still working to get on this is, I'm assuming you're doing the same on your side. It's just so that we can come to some kind of a consensus among ourselves to pose to the larger group here. And I'm sure all of the comments are going to come out eventually. I'm sure we're going to have another discussion on this bill in another work session. And I'll just leave it at that. Yes, we're for open discussion, no question. And I think we may want to open it up. We'll have a full discussion right now, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Representative Bernstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments are in response to Representative Almey's recent comments. And I hope I can say this without sounding snarky or disrespectful, because I truly admire Representative Almey, and she brings a lot to the table, and I know how hard she's worked for the, I love you. But it seems like reducing government resources is totally off the table, in your opinion. You know, this pandemic has caused every household in New Hampshire to scale back and live within its means. This pandemic has asked every business in New Hampshire to do the same thing, to make tremendous sacrifices. I don't see where it should be off the table to ask the government to cut back as well. So I'm not saying, I'm just saying that should be in the array of possibilities. That perhaps, since we've asked every household and every business to scale back a little bit, to tighten their belt, to sacrifice, that it's not out of the question, it's not beyond the pale to ask the state government to do the same thing. That sounded pretty respectful, didn't it? That's all. Thank you.
Could I reply?
Representative Almey.
Thank you. I think we're looking at different sides of the problem. And the side that I think the others in my caucus are trying to look at is that the government is not providing services that are unneeded. And the people that benefit from those services are the same people that you're trying to get more money to by cutting the resources, so we'd cut the services. It's because we do budget so closely in this state, and we frequently don't invest enough in the future because it would cost money now to be able to make things more efficient in the future. But we also cut out services, and I've seen many services cut out in my 25 years since I came home and joined the legislature. We cut out services that make things harder for the families, that make things harder for the employees of businesses, and that make things harder for the businesses themselves, because there is so much within our budget that is mandated either by our Constitution or by the federal government or just by the fact that the citizens have had this for a long time, and they get really upset when it disappears. And that's why a lot of those services, when you cut them out at the state level, shift down to the towns and have to be paid for there, or they're going to lose them. That's being respectful back. I really appreciate your intelligence and thought to these things.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to, I'm trying to synthesize Representative Burstein's opinion versus Representative Almy. And as I look at it, I don't look at it as the Democrats simply wanting to, spend money unnecessarily, nor the Republicans solely wanting to cut all taxes. There is a middle ground. When you live in New Hampshire for as many years as I have, over 5 decades, and have taken care of people in the state for over 4 decades, you come to realize that the services we're providing at the state level are significant and even not enough at this point. And beyond school and education, which we all discuss, I was listening to West Central last night. In the state, we have the 3rd highest overdose rate in the country. We have we are the number 1 state in alcohol consumption. As a result of that, there is right now 1 in 5 people in this state suffer from anxiety or depression. So what I'm getting at is that the services that we provide are mental health, which is under duress right now. In the emergency room last year, we were down to 0 patients being housed in the emergency room. That has gone way back up again. It's very stressful for hospitals because you have to take care of them in the emergency room. It's stressful for physicians and nurses. It's stressful for other patients there as well. So I'm saying that a lot of the services are things like mental health, which we are not funding adequately. Medicaid, we have, which is, as you know, a combined federal and state program. We provide 43% less revenues for Medicaid than does our neighboring state in Vermont. And so what I'm really arguing for is that not for simply just cut taxes or simply overspend the taxpayer money. I would like to think of ourselves as fiscally responsible, but socially aware of the problems in the state. And we have significant social issues. And I'm just saying that we can only gut our revenue sources so much before people suffer, and you see it day and night. Food insecurity in this state right now is going through the roof. Our unemployment rate is twice what it was before the pandemic. So I'm just trying to shed an overarching view of maybe a middle ground that we need to take with respect to taxes versus spending. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Murphy. Representative Malloy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Representative Murphy, for that comment. I was in an unrelated meeting in another meeting last night where I learned just about this mental health situation that you're talking about and the emergency room situation. I also found out in that meeting that we're sending kids down to Anna Jack's Hospital because we can't do it here. It's overflowing, and they're hanging out in emergency rooms with these same kinds of things. So what I want to use here is a response to Representative Bernstein to say that there's a cost here, a societal cost, an infrastructure cost, and I think this still, and I think this all goes to what kind of a state we are, and do people look at us as a place to do business, as a place to come to, as a place to raise their family, as a place that we're going to take care of our own. And and earlier in other testimony, I talked about how this trickles down to towns and property taxpayers, and it does. And I wasn't talking about building a new school with raising that money. This is about being able to keep and hire good policemen, keep and hire good firefighters, keep and hire good teachers based upon the backs of the property taxpayers. So that's my position. And I believe that all of this goes to who we are and what we define as a quality place to live and encourage people to grow their families here. End of conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Malloy. Yeah, I don't see any other hands up. All right. We're going to have to bite the apple and make a decision on 210 and 568. Want to seriously consider we need to get it out by March 11th. Looks like we may not get it out this week, but we'll see how things progress. Now, tomorrow we have public hearings on so many bills. What I was planning on is that some of those bills aren't very long, especially the ones in the morning, that we could take some time in between the bills to at least exec a few of these bills that we talked about today. If the amendment on 330 and 306 is ready, that would be a big help. But those that we don't exec tomorrow, we'll have another bite of the apple when we have public hearings again, which would be the, hold on one second. On the 17th. On the 18th, we're going to have to meet with the governor's budget director and go over his revenues. On the 23rd, I'd like to get the draft numbers out of the revenue so we can send these numbers over to finance with or without an HR. And that's what they'll start with. That's essentially, and then that's the 23rd. There isn't much time left between the 11th, but we have all of these bills that we talked about today. We have, I think, 7 new bills to hear. On the 17th. And then we'll be getting bills as a section committee type committee after they have the session on the 24th and the 25th. Those bills that the policy committees have passed and they pass the session, they deal with revenues. We'll be getting those bills. That's essentially where we stand at this point in time. So I think we've done a great job this morning. Here it is, just 12 after 12, and we've gone through an awful lot. Thank everybody for participating. We still have a few more people that we need to get them going. Because the only way this works is that everybody contributes their part. Any questions?
Yeah. When do you want those who made the motions to get you their report?
Those that made the motion, if you can get me the report by the end of the week.
Okay, I just want to make sure everybody knew that. Okay, thank you.
And even though we'll have time to get them out, I would like to have them by the end of the week. The action was taken now, and those motions should be written up now. Okay. Any other questions?
I have another comment, Norm.
Yeah.
Yesterday, when we were doing the revenues, we were talking about the tobacco tax in Massachusetts. I did ask, Jennifer's still on the call here. I did ask Jennifer to research what's going on in Massachusetts. So hopefully she'll have something for us by next week in terms of any legislation. I guess there's a Senate bill that's active, but she's going to research as much as she can before next week for us on that topic.
Is Jennifer on?
Yeah, she was, but
Had to take a break.
She's been monitoring.
She had to go to another room, is what I should say.
She's monitoring a couple of.
Okay. We'll get that later then.
No, she's gonna report to us next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else from any of the committee members? If not.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Alme.
I just wanted to let the new members know that if you volunteer to write a blurb, the chairman can work with you to make sure that you've got the language right.
Absolutely. And I already have one blurb, but we've got to sit down with somebody and discuss it. Because the blurb should clearly state what the bill does. And if there's an amendment, you have to explain the amendment. And then also explain why the committee is doing what they did.
And if it costs money, how much?
Yes.
Or raises it?
Yep. The effect on the revenues. And if you have any problems, you can always start by looking at last year's blurbs, and you'll find one that covers this subject similar to what you have, and it gives you an idea. Because by the time the blurb gets into the calendar, it's reviewed by the chairman, and then the clerks, and then it goes to the House clerk, and the House clerk may make changes, and you won't know that until it comes out in print. And then when it comes out in print. So, and we want that to reflect our committee doing their job. There's nothing worse than reading somebody's blurb and we passed this, the committee wanted to pass it, period. That's not a blurb. All right. Have a good lunch.
Thank you.
See you all. Thank you.
Hey, Edie.
Hi. Wonderful job.
Texting Jen to tell her we're all done.
So we're coming back after lunch?
No,
I didn't think so.
no. We're done, yay!
It's sunny out, so maybe it's warmer. I can go for a walk.
Yeah, it looks beautiful.
It made me nervous when Representative Rami said they'd discuss this in caucus.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's a really, there are lots of people in the North Country who are in my position, although I'm relatively fortunate economically. But that is that they're widows and they're paying interest and dividends tax on. They have Social Security, which is less when they're There's just one survivor.
Right.
And, that group, that particular tier is really hard hit by that. And I understand that the state counts on that revenue. But, and it's going to be worse and worse as more and more people don't have pensions or they're getting distributions for a 401k. And I assume when they talk about distributions, we've never really established that. But is that what they're talking about?
I don't know. I found that confusing, but I was looking through some of our tax documents and I saw that word in there, distributions, and I try and figure out, what it is specifically. Different.
Well, this year, the feds said you didn't need to take a minimum required distribution if you had IRA or a 401k. But most people did, because in fact, that's the income they're living on plus Social Security. I mean, they're not only wealthy people.
That shouldn't come under interest and dividends, should it?
I think we ought to ask whether that's a distribution or not.
Right. Huh.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we're going to fiddle around with it, we need to understand it better.
Right.
Because I think that with the world of pensions disappearing, and certainly up here, most of the people who worked at the mill who expected to get a pension,
right,
they never got it because the guy who owned the paper mill was a crook. And, he's still in jail, I think. In any case, they never got their pensions. So people who built a life of really hard work, and a lot of those jobs were, I would consider really hard work, working in the pulp mill. But
we probably should tell Ton Lockman that we're all done for the day.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. Sorry, I got disconnected. I had a connectivity issue where I was.
I was trying to promote you from attendees to panelists, and then you just